Hi folks, Sty here. Time for another little Sty story. Let's see. Oh, just a little note. A couple videos back, there's a video in our series that's kind of going to be out of place. It's going to show up in the near future here. I had some editing problems on it, and that video mentions the next video, which happened. But the video where I mentioned the next video didn't happen. Like I said, I'm having some editing problems with it, but it'll get put up. It'll be a little out of sequence, but it'll be put up, and you'll figure it out. So I got to thinking about it. What kind of story do I want to tell you in this video? Well, I got to thinking, and I think where I'm going to go with this one is I've got several of these that I'll probably do, but this one, I guess it's a story about when you head out for a wilderness adventure and it turns into a misadventure. Believe it or not, it happens quite often with certain people. But here we go. When I lived out west, up in the Rockies, I had some friends that moved out west about the same time myself and my family did. And they considered themselves outdoorsmen, but they had never left the state of Minnesota, so the outdoors experience they had was more of your suburban white-tailed deer hunter kind of outdoor experience. So they approached me and they said, Sty, we'd like to go up in the backcountry and do some white-tailed deer hunting. We had a lot of nice trophy deer in our neck of the woods out there. And they said, would you guide us? Would you take us up? And I said, well, sure, I'll take you up. I said, just a day hunt? And they said, well, no, we were thinking like 3 or 4 days. I said, well, okay, sounds good to me. I told them, I said, now make sure, you put your gear together, make sure that you're equipped for that many days. I told them because I knew they weren't that terribly experienced in the wilderness camping realm. I said, make sure your packs are 40 pounds or less. You get over 40 pounds, you're going to be absolutely miserable. Now, we were all much younger at the time, so a 40-pound pack was very reasonable. But anything over 40 pounds wouldn't be. Now, we're up in the high country. We're climbing around in the mountains. So yeah, your weight of your pack has a lot to do with how comfortable your excursion's going to be. Well, excuse me. So these two fellas, the day we're going to head up into the backcountry, they showed up at my cabin, and they're all excited. Boy, they're all excited. I didn't look at their packs or anything. I learned a lot from this trip with these two. I didn't look at their gear at all or anything, and I grabbed my pack and my rifle and said, well, let's saddle up. Let's get up there and do some hunting. So they opted to follow me in their rig, and I took my truck and headed up into the backcountry as far as we could drive in, and knew a good region to go do some nice white-tailed deer hunting, and we're right on the fringe where we're going to see some nice mule deer too, and maybe we'll take a mule deer. So we get up there, and we go to unload their rig, and the one fella pulls his pack out, and that thing is as heavy as sin. I could tell just by the way he was grunting, taking it out of the truck. Well, and then his partner, his pack came out, and it seemed just as heavy, if not heavier. And I walked over and I said, do you mind? And they go, what? And I said, can I pick your pack up? And I picked one of the packs up, and I said, oh my God. I said, that pack's got to be over 80 pounds. And he said, well, yeah, but I can handle it. I said, okay, have you carried 80 pounds before like that? And he said, oh yeah, when we lived in Minnesota, I packed in and camped with this pack loaded this heavy. And I said, well, we're not talking flat ground here. And I said, we're going to be at elevations of 8,000 feet and maybe a little more. I said, the air gets a little thin. I said, it's going to be a little troublesome, I think, for you to carry that heavy of a pack. Oh, no, I can do it. Well, his buddy said the same thing. No, I'm good with my pack. I'm good with my pack. Well, you take their 80-pound pack, and they're both carrying high-powered firearms that were sporting arms. They're very heavy, probably 12 pounds, 14 pounds each. They each carried a sidearm. So they had a lot of weight. So off we went. And we hunted. We set up camp that first night. We hunted a little bit that afternoon. We set up our base camp that night. And I got a fire going, and I got to work putting my supper together. And I got this thing that I do with, as simple as it sounds, that top ramen, it's light as a feather, that top ramen and homemade venison jerky and some dried tomatoes. And I make like a hot dish kind of affair with venison jerky in it. And so that's what I'm fixing for myself for supper. I wanted something good and hearty. And I watched these guys, and all of a sudden they're pulling canned goods out of their packs. One fella had a big can of beans, and the other fella had a big can of Dinty Moore beef stew, and I'm thinking, holy smokes, they brought canned goods up here. Then the next thing I know, they're pulling out pots and pans out of their pack. I thought they brought the whole kitchen. I wonder what their wives are using to cook with that back at home. And so I figured, well, it's their cat. They want to do it that way. They got to carry it. I'm not carrying it. So we hunted all the next day. We didn't have any luck the next day. We saw some deer, but not what we wanted to take. And then, and we broke for lunch, came back to base camp, broke for lunch, and I made some bannock over the fire, and I had myself a peanut butter bannock sandwich. And, out came the canned goods again, and they had something, the heavy cans of food. Well, that night after we got back, same thing. They pulled out all these canned goods, and they're making their supper. And, they had some good eats, that's for sure. There was a lot of weight to carry up there. Now, mind you, this is just the second night. We're going to stay 3 nights, go home the afternoon of the 4th day. The next day, come lunchtime, we met up back in camp. Still hadn't taken a deer, none of us. And I started fixing my lunch. I can't remember what I was fixing. Something simple, but something with a lot of carbs in it. And I noticed they weren't eating. I didn't think nothing of it. I thought, well, they're not hungry. They ate enough to last 24 hours for a week. But so that night when we came back in, still hadn't taken a deer. I'm fixing my supper, and they're not. And I said, aren't you guys going to fix some dinner for yourselves? Well, we're out of food. I said, you're what? They said, we're out of food. I said, you got to be kidding me. I said, as heavy as your packs were, I would have thought you had a month's worth of food in your packs. Come to find out, they're out of food. They are. They're totally out of food. I wasn't going to let on to them that I had enough food in my 30-pound pack to keep the 3 of us out there for at least a week without us even having to go out and hunt and fish or do anything else to feed ourselves. So I told them, I said, I'll give you some pointers on how to gather up some food. You do that, and you'll eat. Well, I told them, go down to that creek down there, and I said, you catch yourself some brook trout. And I said, you guys can have trout for supper. Oh, that's a good idea. And they looked at each other kind of funny. And then they headed down to that creek. They came back about an hour later, both of them soaking wet. And I said, excuse me. I said, why are you soaking wet? They said, well, we didn't have any fishing gear, and we tried throwing rocks at them. We even jumped in the creek and tried to corral them into a pool, and I laughed. I said, come on, guys. We walked down there. I took a piece of line off of my hat. Back then, I always carried some monofilament around the rim of my hat and a bunch of flies in my hat. And pulled a fly out, tied it on that monofilament, took about a 6-foot long sapling, cut myself a pole, tied the line to it, started hitting that creek. Within 20 minutes, I had about 14 brook trout. And I said, now we're eating trout for supper. After that trip, and that's the way it went for the rest of the trip. In fact, the morning of the 4th day, I dropped a deer, and we were fortunate enough that that we were going to head out that afternoon, and I shot that deer a few hours before that. So I partially dressed out the deer, and I cut one of the back straps out, and we had back straps for lunch that 4th day. They loved every bit of it. But when we got to town, and I talked to one of their family members a few days later, and they said that those two guys have no interest of ever going up in the backcountry with me again. That is too rough, too terrible. You can't haul enough food in with you. And I told that person, I said, well, the thing is they don't want to learn. They want to bring town with them. They probably don't belong out there because they can't bring themselves down to the point where it's simple life in the wilderness. It's all there. Everything's available to you. You bring the absolute essentials. You don't bring your pantry with you into the woods. So those fellas, they got a really rude awakening on what going out in those wilderness conditions can be when you don't have the skills or the knowledge. So this is Sty North, end of this story. We'll pick up another one in the next video. You all have a nice day.